Good evening. I'm going to call this meeting to order. I'd like roll call, please. Commissioner DeGiorgio,
Present.
Commissioner Mason,
Present.
Commissioner Radnich.
Present.
I believe Vice Chair Deming is going to be here late, so we'll call him not present yet. And Chair LaBunch, I'm here. I'm present. Can I have a motion to adopt tonight's agenda?
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 4-0. Do we have any public comments that are not on tonight's agenda?
We have no speakers in the room for items not on the agenda. Checking online. If you would like to speak to the commission for up to 3 minutes on an item that is not on tonight's agenda, please go ahead and raise your hand. Seeing none.
Okay. We'll close public comments then. For our consent calendars, does anyone have anything they want to amend, adjust, question? Otherwise, I'd like motion to adopt the consent calendar. Please.
I move that we adopt the consent calendar.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0. New public hearing. Objective design standards. It says here it will only take about 20 minutes, so I'm excited. So I'll turn it over to staff.
I make no claim to the 20-minute notation. Hello, my name is Arlie Cassidy, Senior Planner for the city. We're here to talk about objective design standards. And before I turn it over to the consultant for the main presentation, I just wanted to give some background information. I thought I'd start it off with asking what are objective standards and how are they used, because that might not be clear to the average user or reader. So development standards, as differentiated from design standards, regulate the general shape of development, such as height or setbacks. These are things that are already in our code per zoning district. Design standards, on the other hand, which is what we're talking about tonight, regulate the design, architecture, and layout of a site, such as building massing and articulation, windows and balconies, and colors and materials. These are some of the titles of the boards that are in the back of the room tonight that talk about these subjects in more detail. State law now requires that certain development applications, such as SB 35, be reviewed using only objective standards. No discretionary review is required or allowed. These standards will apply to multifamily and mixed-use development throughout the city. However, if a project applies for a density bonus, they can use concessions and waivers to avoid individual standards. The rest of the objective design standards would still apply if they're not using one to avoid applying it. With this in mind, the DRC working group had the goal of making the ODS describe good design without being so onerous as to push development towards the density bonus path. So that's kind of the framework that we're in for the document. And then just to look briefly at some background of this thrust, which is phase 2 of ODS. Back in 2019, the city adopted objective design standards phase 1 for multifamily and mixed use with residential projects. We've been using them since then, but back in 2024 and 2025, the city adopted its 6th cycle housing element and immediately updated the general plan land use element and zoning to align with this new housing element. Now the city is turning to phase 2 of the objective design standards to expand its functionality and to comply with state law requiring that only objective standards be applied to ministerial review. Implementing this, adopting phase 2 of ODS, is in fact one of the programs of the housing element. So phase 2, the process began in June 2025. There was a joint study session, which you likely participated in, with the City Council, Planning Commission, and DRC, where DRC was directed to work with staff and our consultant to develop the draft document. DRC met as a whole and formed a working group to execute that directive. And that working group met 3 times this fall with the consultant and staff to develop the draft document you have before you. On November 20th, the DRC held a full meeting and an open house to invite the public for comment and feedback and allow the full body of the DRC to review the document and offer its own feedback. DRC did make some minor changes to the document and also voted to append these display boards in the room to the draft ODS document, and it was attached in your staff report for your review. Or excuse me, the board's PDF version were attached. The DRC then voted to forward the document to the Planning Commission with a recommendation of approval. Now, I do want to note that previously I had communicated that the Planning Commission may not be reviewing this. We were thinking about taking the document from DRC straight to the City Council for review. But since then, we determined that the objective design standards should live in the code and be adopted formally as part of the municipal code. As such, the required review path includes the Planning Commission. And so we're now taking it to you to gain your feedback and input onto the document, given that this will be part of our municipal code. So tonight, the Planning Commission will be reviewing the document and the boards and can offer its feedback and review. If the Planning Commission feels that the document is ready, you can vote to forward the objective design standards to the City Council with a recommendation of approval. If not, we can continue the item to the next available meeting, which would be January 5th. I want to note, as described further in the staff report, that no CEQA action is required, given that this is implementing the housing element, which was already completely analyzed under CEQA. So with that, I'd like to introduce Monica Sidlick and Cal Kurtz from Lisa Wise Consulting, who will give the presentation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Arlie. I'd like to make sure that my screen is projecting. Okay. Great. So thank you, Arlie. Cal and I are glad to be here before you. As you know, we are from Lisa Wise Consulting, and we've been working with the City of Lafayette for a little over a year now. And as Arlie mentioned, we were last here in June, and since then have developed this public draft, or now hearing draft, objective design standards. So the team has been Greg and Arlie, David, director at Lisa Wise Consulting, myself, and Cal. And just as a quick reminder, Lisa Wise Consulting we're a land use, economics, and planning implementation firm. And Cal and I are both here in the Bay Area, and we do a lot of housing elements and a whole lot of objective design standards, as well as code updates. So all things zoning. So we're really glad to have been working with Lafayette over the last little bit more than a year, and we're glad to present these design standards to you all. So we have a short presentation here. We'll do a quick background on this particular project. We'll talk a little bit about the process that led us to the design standards in your packet. We'll go through the standards themselves briefly, and then we'd love to hear from you about them. So as I said, we've been working with the City of Lafayette for a little over a year. So backing up a bit, as you know, we began with some rezoning that was required to implement the housing element that the community worked so hard on. So we worked on the rezoning primarily to develop zones to support the 60 dwelling unit per acre zones densities required by the housing element. And the policies listed here. And then after those amendments, zoning amendments and general plan land use element amendments were adopted in January, we began this second effort, which is updating the objective design standards, the design standards that the city already adopted back in 2019, but understanding that we needed to rethink them to make sure that they would support the new zones, the higher density zones, and also revisit them so that they wouldn't apply just to the downtown specific plan area as the current OZS do, but to any and all zones throughout the city that support multifamily and mixed use development. So this is a snapshot of the process that we've gone through since we kicked off this project in April. You recall we saw you here in June. We did all of our research, made our findings. At your direction, we met with the Design Review Commission Working Group several times in the fall. We had the open house last month, and now we're here at the first hearing. Okay, so a quick recap on ODS, which Arlie already went through, but just a couple of items to refresh our memory. ODS is really in response to SB 330 and the required ministerial pathway that the state requires for multifamily and mixed-use projects. So a ministerial pathway is required. ODS aren't required, but they're encouraged so that there are standards by which projects can be reviewed in a streamlined manner instead of discretionary review. So the advantages are that ODS removes uncertainty from the review and approval process because applicants know what they're expected to comply with. And then the standards encourage developers to follow the ODS in order to achieve that ministerial, predictable, streamlined pathway. And then most importantly for the community, the objective design standards are an opportunity for the whole community to identify what it really wants to see instead of hammering it out over a lengthy discretionary review process. So the little flowchart on the right shows the options. If a project complies with all the zone standards, meaning the basic development standards, FAR, height, density, setback, and all the objective design standards, it goes through this ministerial review pathway that we have to provide. If a project complies with all the basic development standards, height, setbacks, FAR, density, but not the objective design standards, then it still goes to the regular discretionary review path that exists today and always has. If a project doesn't comply with any of these, including the basics, meaning height, setback, then it would typically require a variance. So as I mentioned, these standards will apply in every zone that supports multifamily and mixed use. So as you can see in this portion of the updated zoning map, this is basically the browns and peaches and reds and purples. So it's the downtown, but it's also a few scattered sites that we rezoned at the end of last year, beginning of this year. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about the process that we've gone through. First and foremost, we've got to make sure that we're consistent with all the policies that are on the books. So we documented and combed through relevant land use policies to make sure that we're consistent with what these guiding principles and policies are that this community has already established. We looked through all applicable zone planning documents. So the downtown specific plan and all the policies and the design guidance provided within. We looked at the downtown design guidelines. So of course they're not objective, but they provide a lot of good guidance, right? They tell us what the community wants to see and what the community values. So we carefully documented and combed through what we saw in this document, thinking specifically about how to achieve these guidelines on the sites that we're looking at and in projects that achieve the densities that we're looking at. So this slide just identifies a lot of the specific elements that we pulled from that document. Okay, so we looked at existing and recent and proposed projects. We looked at how they were received by the community. We looked at how sort of what the design review process and planning commission review, what came out of those? What were the changes that were required? What were the discussions like? What came up? What's on the community's mind? Just so we know, we could get a sense for what are the priorities? What are people looking at and what do people care about? And we took a look at all of the specific, the details. We looked at how do these buildings come together and what are the design components that the community is pointing out or that the community is maybe taking issue with. We looked at the existing design standards and we just picked them apart. So we measured recent projects up against them. We started developing our own massing models to see, okay, now we see what these standards are, but now if we're looking at 60 dwelling unit per acre buildings, how do they work? Where do they perhaps pose some constraints? But we saw that they address design of open space and lots of budding creeks and landscape design. In some case, it's by points versus simple yes or no. A lot about landscaping, bicycle parking, and then some standards about facade, massing and articulation, elevations that face streets, and then shaving down upper stories of buildings. And then we had already looked at these in developing the basic development standards for the new zones. We did so again with an eye towards design and understanding from the community what sort of design features you're looking for. We came here to speak with you in June, along with the council and the DRC, and we heard a lot of good feedback. We've jotted them down on the slide here. We heard that the points aren't really working well. We had heard some good hints about what to address and what you all would like to see required in the standards. We heard that we don't want to overregulate too much. Perhaps the most impactful piece of direction that we came out of that meeting with is that you requested that we work with a subcommittee, a subgroup, working group of the DRC. So we did that over a series of 3 meetings that Arlie mentioned in the fall. And we really talked about everything in those meetings. They were very hands-on. We sketched a lot. We looked at a lot of images. We talked about a lot of projects. We talked about everything in those meetings. The focus, or perhaps the bullets that you see on these slides. And the 2 working group members, Glenn and Richard and Cal and I and the staff, were a very collaborative team in developing what's before you. And then on November 20th, we presented these to the community. We went back to the full DRC and we modified a little bit and refined a little bit. So that's the draft that's before you. Now I'll just go through the standards quickly. Okay, so it starts, so the draft is intended to be inserted as a new chapter in your zoning code, chapter 639. And we anticipate it would be called Objective Design Standards for Multifamily Mixed-Use Development. It starts with purpose statements. Again, pulled from the existing source material that we talked about and reviewed with the working group. So starting from big to small, essentially, we looked at massing. How do we want to sort of chunk out buildings based on site size and building size? So we developed standards for buildings over 100 feet in length. It's maybe wise to point out that the graphics in the document each accompany one standard, right? So the images are not intended to be, here is the building that you can build, this and only this. It's the opposite, really. The standards illustrate concepts. So for example, these are illustrating that the vertical break in the building. Once you get a building so long, it's got to step in, right? So the frontage isn't too long and it provides some relief to pedestrians and to users of the building. For buildings over 175 feet in length, again, we looked at existing at new and proposed projects, and we looked at the sites, and we looked at the rights of way that they face, and modified the standards as needed. And then we worked in requirements for open space, either publicly accessible or common open space, and worked out the required dimensions so that the requirements would be feasible, would be workable, and would still be flexible enough to allow creativity on the part of the applicant and designer. We introduced vertical, well, this one not so much introduced. A lot of this is taken from the objective design standards from 2019, but we established vertical building articulation standards, but also varied them based on building height here. And horizontal building articulation. We introduced options for ensuring that the base versus the middle of the building are distinguished. And also introduced standards for when a building requires a distinguished, visually distinct base, middle, top versus base and middle based on height. And then the upper story step backs, we kept an existing standard in your current ODS, which required that the third story be no more than 85% of the floor area of the ground floor with that reduction along street facing elevations. Roof variation, we do want to encourage applicants to incorporate variation in roof design to prevent long and unchanging roof lines. At the same time, we want to allow flexibility to ensure that the densities can be supported and are feasible and given the standards, and give applicants options for building design. So we've got a range of roof forms and the requirements for specific roof forms when a parapet needs to change after how many feet. Privacy, understanding that with more dense projects, especially abutting single family zones or other multifamily zones, we want to be conscious of sight lines and privacy into primary residential buildings, rooms. So we introduced some privacy standards within 10 feet of the side setback line. And then because we're looking at mixed use, we looked at how do we ensure that the non-residential component of mixed use buildings encourages an active street frontage and an inviting pedestrian environment. So we introduced standards for transparency and limits on blank walls for all street facing elevations. We looked at windows and worked to determine what's the threshold for amount of fenestration and for window size to really be reflective of what we understand is the character of Lafayette. And we tested out a few buildings to figure out the percentage of fenestration and use that to develop the standard that's in the draft. And then we zoomed in closer to windows and thought about construction and how to ensure that windows look high quality and they look consistent with the buildings that you like in Lafayette. So what are we requiring in terms of recess or trim, how to make them look good, essentially. We looked carefully at building materials. This we understand is an important factor in how permanent a building looks and how high quality it looks. So we looked at some of the materials we see in Lafayette and the materials we're seeing in new development projects in in Lafayette and in the region. And we developed some standards about materials, permitted materials and also prohibited materials. And we took a close look at colors and how to regulate colors. And we discussed this at length with a working group and developed a system to ensure that the colors were consistent with the palette that we see and that we like in Lafayette. And we refined that further at the DRC meeting. And then we also stepped back and looked at site design. When service parking is incorporated into a project, what are the requirements? How do we want to screen the parking, and where should it be located with respect to the building? And when parking is structured, what sort of standards do we want to introduce to ensure that it's not visually overwhelming from abutting rights of way? And Lafayette is lucky in that you've got creeks and trails through the downtown. So we want to acknowledge that and ensure that new development capitalizes on this resource and provides continuous pathways and access to these resources. And then street facing yards, we pulled this from the existing ODS, to the standards for landscaping requirement in the front yard. And that's a summary of the standards before you, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Great. Thank you for that presentation. So what was that?
Chair, I just wonder if I could add one thing. I just wanted to call attention to the fact that our Design Review Commission Vice Chair, Richard Stanton, has joined us and is available for questions if you're curious about why the draft document has a specific regulation in it. He was there in the room as it was developed. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here, Richard.
And so unlike, so we'll discuss, or first we'll ask questions if we have any, then discuss, and then I assume it'll be interactive as opposed to, and then we'll go from there. So does anyone have clarifying questions? Let's start with that first. Or maybe they could just be the same since we're just going to be talking. So if you have questions, just, yeah. Okay, let's start with clarifying questions, then public comment, then we'll come back. Is that the, yeah, okay. Clarifying questions? Go ahead. Yeah, unless it's a clarifying question, yes. I mean, I guess I meant like, we're not discussing, it's like you didn't understand what something was said.
Somewhat confused about that you use for the previous round, for the buildings, we used objective and subjective. This time you use discretionary instead of subjective. But we have objective, which may or may not be requirements, but for things like siding and stuff like that, we have objective, which are hard and fast requirements. And I'm wondering, am I reading that right?
Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a lot of planning terminology, and it, because it's in response to recent legislation, is changing fast. So maybe it helps to clarify a ministerial pathway is one that's sort of streamlined and only based on objective standards versus a discretionary review process uses guidelines, uses subjective findings.
Well, yeah.
Does that,
And that,
okay.
I'm fine with that whole concept. But where I'm saying is, it seems like you built in a little wiggle room. Okay, they come in, they meet the intent of these new objective standards, but instead of 10-foot setbacks, they have 8-foot setbacks or something like that. And I'm wondering, where is it hard and fast? Or is it intended to be hard and fast? Or is it intended to, just kind of meet the intent of what you're saying or what you want? I'm afraid of essentially a mission creep.
I can maybe take that. The intent of creating objective standards is that they are very hard and fast.
Yeah.
The linchpin here is objective. It needs to be crisp so that any person reading it would come to the same conclusion. We don't want there, and you use the word intent, and there actually shouldn't be intent. There should, because that implies that there's some kind of interpretation. There should just be, is the building red or not? You know, it needs, every single requirement should be able to be answered with a yes or no, not mostly.
Okay.
That's where we get into trouble. And so, you know, we already do discretionary review with some objective standards like height or setbacks. They're hard numbers that must be complied with. And if they're not, they can apply for a variance. What's different here is if they're not complying with the objective design standards, is they would no longer be allowed to use that pathway.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was hoping to hear. I was afraid that we're using objective two different ways in two different.
It needs to be very crisp.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Any other qualifying question? All right, maybe we go to public comment now then. We'll open this to public comment. If you have any questions, please come on up.
Our first speaker is Elliot Hudson.
Good evening, Commissioners. Before I start, a lot of meetings, there is a limitation of 3 minutes. I'd like to ask for about another minute. I'm the only public speaker here. This is a very important topic, so I would like to have about another minute.
So 4,
Okay.
I think we could swing that.
All right, thank you. In evaluating the draft objective design standards, let's start with the basics. The standard's single most important purpose is to govern the physical appearance of Lafayette for the future. Based on repeated public comment, the City Council set that desired appearance when it unanimously adopted the mission statement in 2022, just a few years ago. And it said, "Make Lafayette a small town community with semi-rural ambiance, not just nice buildings, a small town, semi-rural ambiance. That is how Lafayette residents want this town to look." Measured by that objective, these standards unquestionably fail. 2 examples prove indisputably that that's true. First, if this draft were submitted by a student in an architecture class with an assignment to create a town with a small town, or I'm sorry, a semi-rural look, they'd get a D at best and maybe an F. If you just pick them up and read them through, you would never conclude that a small town semi-rural ambiance is their primary objective. Nearly every illustration and photograph in the draft is a modernistic blocky square building. The minimal examples that actually fit the mission statement are presented as hardly noticeable afterthoughts. Nowhere do the standards unambiguously and clearly state that their overriding primary objective is a semi-rural ambiance. Nowhere. And the written standards themselves are inadequate, which brings me to the second proof. Take these standards and drive through Walnut Creek. This draft allows almost every modern stumpy building you will see that's been put up in the last 10 years, with the possible exception of we require a little bit more upper floor setbacks. When Lafayette residents say repeatedly, "We don't want to be Walnut Creek," this is a Walnut Creek design handbook. How did it happen? It's not really the consultant's fault. It happened because the consultant who set out to draft these standards was not adequately instructed at the outset to follow the mission statement. Don't let the purpose section they just showed you fool you tonight into thinking that otherwise. They wrote the bullets, but in what they wrote, the one about semi-rural was at the bottom, where almost nobody would even bother to read it. What you read was what I sent to the Design Review Commission 3 days before their last meeting. They didn't write it and they didn't do it. You want further proof? Where in that presentation did they say semi-rural? You want more proof? Where is it on these boards? Not one word, not one single word. The consultant failed to carry out the mission statement because they never made semi-rural ambiance the priority that the city council said in the mission statement it should be. So reject these standards until they're fixed, which can actually be relatively easy. Too much is at stake. The very future of Lafayette State is Lafayette, and what people love about this town is at stake. The flat roofs on these standards are catastrophic. They're modernistic and blocky. They're stumpies. To the contrary, without exception, every semi-rural graphic that they have in here, the few they have, a number of which I submitted, is constructed with a sloped roof or something other than a flat roof. There's too much glass surface and too many large panes. I'm almost done. The standards present 210 Lafayette Circle as an acceptable example of glass area. If that's true, and you build that building more than 3 stories tall, you might as well be in downtown San Francisco. Okay, I'm out of time. There are other reasons too. But these standards should not be approved till they're fixed. The purpose section needs to say the primary purpose is a semi-rural design, because that's what the city council said. And the design standards themselves need to be written to be true to that directive. Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Hudson, thank you. Let me ask you a question. I hear what you're saying. I am not a architect, so this to me is a little bit harder because of the idea that we're going to have basically a mouse trap. It says if you can get through the mouse trap, you can build. So, but that's also why we outsourced it to technical people, including the consultants in DRC who are more geared to understand, let's just say it, architecture. So here's what I wanted to ask you, because at the beginning of your question, I wasn't hearing it. I did read your email. I did look at your exhibits. Do you believe all of semi-rural, the nature that you're asking for, could be accomplished while maintaining the requirements of our new housing element with 2,034 additional units in the next cycle? Do you believe that they both can happen?
Yes, absolutely. Semi-rural is just about what the buildings look like.
Okay,
And
so it's not a density question. It's just more of the focus on it being semi-rural versus what you saw today.
do I believe that it can occur and still meet the housing element? Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, yes. You can make the outside of the buildings of the same volume essentially look like you want.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Some other questions.
Thank you for your comment. I do have a question. I'm trying to skim as you were wrapping up responding to the chair. You provided a comment, and I'm hoping, since you didn't speak on it just now, I'm hoping you can expand a little, because I wanted to ask staff and I wanted to make the connection for the record. Somewhere in your public comment in print, you said something along the lines of, and that's what I'm going to ask you to expand on, a recommendation in your opinion that maybe allowing taller buildings to accommodate for different roof pitches. Can you please either remind me where in your public comment that was, or if you can expand on it in person?
I'm happy to expand on it. The issue when you get to the roofs and the flat roofs is developers will say, we want the flat roofs because we get more building volume. And you know, to some extent, there may be some truth to that. I think it's not that much different if you require, and I'm not an architect, so forgive the terminology, but if you require peaks or hips or mansards or something like that, excuse me, you don't really have to lose a lot of volume to do that. But to the extent that you might, it would be, in my view, a very acceptable trade-off to measure the allowable height to the top of the wall and then allow a little additional height above that to accommodate a roof that's much more in keeping with the character that Lafayette wants to be. I mean, you You know, there are the mass of buildings with the state requires makes this harder. It also makes it critically important to do everything you can. 1,000 doing, you know, I was involved in the argument on 1,000 doing and opposed it because we didn't want buildings in Lafayette that big. The state says we have to. If you take that and you say, okay, we now have to allow that building, 1,000 doing is pretty good. I mean, it is consistent with the semi-rural character that Lafayette wants. Byron Park near on Tice Boulevard is the same. You know, so you can do it. You just have to put some thought into the exterior. And there are a number of good things in this.
I appreciate that. So I think you did answer my question. It was just the clarifying,
Okay.
your comment was, so then I guess my question to staff would be, is that something, if the commission, you know, chose to make a recommendation maybe for a modification, is that something that would be captured in the ODS? Or is that something that if the city were interested, planning commission were interested for a recommendation, it would actually be maybe in the code or something? Can you speak to that? Thank you, Mr. Hudson. Also, thank you.
Well,
Both-
before you go down, I
yeah.
think there's some other questions, so
Okay.
go ahead.
Well, the first for staff.
Well, this kind of
I-
goes along with,
Yeah.
which is, could you, you know, given that the state's saying we need
Greg.
certain volume,
Microphone.
given that the state says we need to have certain volume, could you rank your preferences as far as articulation versus height versus just frontal mass? So that we could understand better what your main goal is.
I'm sorry, I have two, but one is my hearing is really bad.
Okay, so you were talking about your concerns, you want to, you talked about building height, for example, as
Yes.
something that is important. Is that a preferred option to lower but more massing with more articulation? I'm trying, and more, you know, upper floor setbacks. I'm trying to see where to get the same amount of volume. I'm trying to see where your priorities lie.
Well, again, you know, I'm not an architect, but my sense is that with the amount of articulation that they're talking about here, that you're not necessarily giving up a lot of building volumes. I don't really think it's a trade-off. I don't think it's an either or for the roof forms. I mean, really, if you drive through Walnut Creek and you look at these blocks after block after block after block of square blocks, it's awful. And that can be built here. There's nothing that says you can't do that. I don't think it's a trade-off of either or. I think you can fix the roofs and still have the other elements. And I don't think it's difficult to do.
Thank you.
One quick question. Well, Mr. Hudson, one quick question for you. One more. You mentioned, I think just now, sending in examples, photos or of buildings that you thought were maybe more semi-rural, or did I misunderstand that?
I did submit examples I met with Commissioner Cass early on in this process and provided him with a number of examples, including Town Center 2,
Okay.
1,000 Doing, Byron Park.
Okay, that's so I got it now. So you submitted it to the DRC subcommittee. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
All right, do you want to ask staff that?
Yeah, so I guess back to staff. I do appreciate the public comment from Mr. Hudson regarding the roof heights. So I guess I just want to ask staff, is that something that would be captured in the ODS, or is that something that if it were, you know, a recommendation that would be captured somewhere else?
Both are possible. It would be staff's recommendation that we provide a different definition than what we currently have for building height within the ODS. And that's because the issue that Mr. Hudson is bringing up pertains to how the ODS applies to design, and the ODS primarily is applying to the downtown and more developed areas. The definition we have now measures our maximum height from the middle of the tallest roof form. So if we were to change that to the lowest end of that roof form, it would, I mean, we haven't analyzed it, but it could potentially substantially change what can be built in our lower density and single family residential districts. So we would recommend that if the Planning Commission is interested in carrying this idea forward, that a definition of height specific to the ODS and its application to projects be added to the ODS document. And then that would be something that applies only when following this review path.
Thank you.
Do we have any more public comments? Online or otherwise?
No more in the room, but checking online. If you would like to speak on this item, please use your raise hand button. We do have one speaker, Robert Lavoie. And Mr. Lavoie, you are able to speak. Looks like you are unmuted.
Hello?
Please go ahead. We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was just like to cede my time to Elliot because I agree with him completely and he's more expert than me on this topic. And I'm also on hold with customer service right now, so I apologize. So if you could do that, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lavoie. Good luck.
All right. I mean, so he wanted to give you his time. Did you need to discuss more, Mr. Hudson? That would be 3 additional minutes or 2.5 because he spoke for a little bit. But do you feel like you already got your point across? Okay, thank you. All right, so we will close public comments. There are no more. Bring it back to up here. Go ahead.
A question for staff first. So the downtown design guidelines, refresh me. Are those guidelines going to be updated? And if they're going to be updated, would they have the opportunity to show buildings that are more considered perhaps by some to be semi-rural?
Just for clarity's sake,
Yeah.
you're speaking about the downtown design guidelines, which
Yes.
followed the
Yeah,
adoption of
it's
the.
an old document, right?
Okay.
Right.
Uh,
And I was wondering whether that document is going to be updated or that's just the way it is.
It certainly could, but I don't think that was part of this
No.
anticipated scope.
I'm asking for the reason of getting to, I appreciated Mr. Hudson's letter and he had a lot of good points in it. One of which was concerning the building illustrations that are actually illustrating specific design elements, right? But his comment was towards if you put that in, that's what people might follow. Now that may or may not be true, but my question then is, given the fact that he said he submitted pictures to the working group, I wondered whether any of these illustrations should be either updated or we put a comment in there saying something like these pictures intentionally illustrate design elements, not the building form or something to that nature. And I was just saying, do we want to update these pictures or is it going to be somewhere else? That's where I was going with all that. That was just a question. I don't know if you've thought that through or not.
We understood Mr. Elliott's comments to relate to the photos that were included in the boards that the DRC was presented with, which the DRC requested would be made an appendix to the objective standards. So those are certainly modifiable at this point in time to essentially eliminate a photo showing a flat roof building and insert a photo showing a roof pitch building if it's appropriate to the content of the board. So yes, that can be done. And I think the commission can discuss it. And hopefully we're able to locate and bring up on screen for you photos that Mr. Hudson spoke to.
Okay. Then if I can move on, the issue on the amount of concrete, the 70% figure, and I don't know if Monica or you want to talk about, I don't know how much that was discussed in the groups. I wouldn't know how to set a percentage, but does staff and or Monica, do you feel like that's too high of a number, or is that reasonable given what new developments are using?
Monica, do you want to take that?
Yeah, it's consistent with best practices that we would recommend so that a building doesn't look too just monotonous, monotone. We would advise that would support the amount of sort of variation in material that the community is ultimately looking for.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
If I could also add, I don't remember if this specific regulation or number was part of this, but the DRC chair, Glenn Cass, did take it upon himself to reach out to a number of developers before we began our meetings to understand what their perspective was. And they did give very valuable feedback, which of course we took with a grain of salt. We're not going to just take their information and codify it. But it's very good to understand their perspective in the making of this, especially given, as I mentioned earlier, that we're trying to make this an attractive path for developers. And so I believe that this was one of the numbers that they provided feedback on, that it comes down to cost and what they can kind of afford more easily versus what becomes more expensive.
Okay.
Let me ask a question. I think, and I feel that we're all similar here in that I said it earlier, I'm not a design expert. I don't think anyone up here is per se, but, and that was an interesting point brought up. Before this meeting, I really struggled with what was I going to say here, because I have this feeling we're going to do it. And then in 10 years, we're going to say, oh, we made some mistakes on this aspect and maybe not on that. So that's probably going to happen no matter what. So I just had this idea because I've been trying to learn about AI more, and I realize it has to do with the prompt that you asked gives you the best answer. So I'm going to treat you like ChatGPT for a second and say, if I wanted to come up with a solution that gave me a more semi-rural feeling in 10 years, what would you modify with what we have so far to get that? Now, that might not do with what was just brought up about developers wanting to get right there, but it might give us the ability to say within the ability of our control at the city level, telling the world what we want. If a developer comes in and says, I want a concession, I'm doing a flat roof because that's the only way I can do it, that's beyond our control. But at least we would tell them what we want. So back to that question, if you could answer it.
So there's always trade-offs, right? I'd like to think that maybe ChatGPT isn't well versed in the nuances of the trade-offs that a community versus a developer or the trade-offs they're weighing in order to ensure that development at these densities is really feasible. So it may come down to the details, and that's really why these standards focus on materials and colors and window construction. We're picking up on what we see in the community and what we've read in design review and what we've discussed with Glenn and Richard and the city staff to describe details that give buildings a look and feel that is familiar and that hopefully gets at what we understand as semi-rural. At the same time, the bigger picture, or larger scale, I should say, building massing and the flexibility that we want to allow developers when it comes to volumes and floor plates and plate height of ceilings, right? And roof form, really, because we know that adds cost. We want to be able to say, in all honesty, that we're not demanding design elements that really reasonably would be considered to be constraints to achieving these densities.
Okay, but there's always a balance, like you said, and maybe let me frame it this way. I don't know where and just using Walnut Creek, I have nothing against Walnut Creek's architecture, but just using that as an example, do they already have design standards? Like, do you guys know where they are in this process?
I don't know. I can tell you Lisa Wise Consulting has not prepared ODS for Walnut Creek.
Because if you had known that, I would say, how would you rate ours relative to theirs? Like, are we going down the same path, or are we going down a more semi-rural path? I do think it's something that's an interesting thought, like, because we could just say, hey, you can do a 10-story building and it could be 100%, plaster or whatever, because that's the cheapest to build. But we don't want to do that. And you've done that, right? You've kind of looked at what we have here. So I'm just trying to figure out this, just knowing that in the absence, we are going to 10 years from now or 5 years from now have to course correct. So I'm hoping someone has a good idea of how, if there's anything we could do light adjustments. I think what you guys have done, it looks really great. And I know you have experts who are advising for the city, both DRC and staff. So I'm relying on your expertise, their expertise, because we all want the same thing. But putting our stamp on it, is there anything we should be looking at that could move the needle a little towards semi-rural aspects? Which, I mean, and I'll shut up after this. What the state's done is going to take that away. The densities are going to take away semi-rural. You can't have semi-rural with 60 units per acre. I don't think those are congruent. So we can't have everything. So anyways, anything we can do?
I don't have anything, I suppose, to add that I would say we should do additionally. Again, if there's something specific that comes to mind that you would like to see, that can be very helpful for us. But I will just say, just kind of echoing what Monica said, so much of our standards were based on, for example, the windows. We know that, okay, what do cheap windows look like? They're flush to, the exterior. They look awful after a handful of years. So we wanted to allow flexibility while still, echoing a lot of that traditional architectural character that we see within the city, which is why you see those standards written that way. In a similar way, we know, of course, stucco is the cheapest thing we can do materials-wise, but we want to see many other more traditional materials as well, which is why stucco is limited to 70%. So, many of our standards, that care was taken. The colors that are allowed, that was a really big discussion point, because we wanted to be sure that we don't have those garish modern colors. We want to make sure that we're being, we looked at historical palettes when we were developing those colors, just to be absolutely sure that we are encouraging those architectural styles to be built.
Thank you.
Well, toss out one thing for the four of us to talk about. I grew up in this town. I've been here since '68. Okay. It's not the town I grew up in is not coming back. But when you talk about semi-rural, I think about back to when I was a kid, and I just loved all being outside, all the running around, stuff like that. With the density, it's hard to get. One of the places we can get it is encourage roof decks, big flat areas, barbecues on them. You've got views of Mount Diablo. You have a little clubhouse up there or something like that. And I was wondering what everybody else thought about that, because we really, and I use this two examples as compare in Walnut Creek, there's the big monoliths over by the Pleasant Hill BART, which are ugly. They look like a prison. And then you compare those to the two projects that are kitty corner from Target. They have roof decks up there, their architectural features on the roof. And, to me, those look pretty good. I wouldn't mind having those downtown. I wouldn't want the stuff around Walnut, Pleasant Hill BART downtown. Anyway, that's just my thoughts.
Comments, questions?
I don't have anything directly in response to that, but I have a couple thoughts to share. So first, thank you to everybody who has been involved. I was present at the June session, and this is miles past where we were in June. So clearly a lot of effort has gone into this. I do appreciate that a DRC subcommittee or subcommittee with DRC was involved prior to it coming to Planning Commission. As many planning commissioners have already said, and even public speakers, that we're not design experts. So I do really appreciate the time to spend with the subcommittee before it came to us. Just a couple things I want to half ask, half discuss. So let's just say tonight, Planning Commission, we make a recommendation and then it's going to go to City Council. When would that happen? Like, would that be January? Would that?
Yeah, we've tentatively scoped out the January 12th city council date if this moves forward.
Okay. So one thing I'd like to respectfully ask staff, if there's any way for that staff report to city council to come out a couple days early, I think that would be a huge benefit. I know it's coming off of the holidays, a lot of people traveling, just to make sure members of the public and the city council have enough time to review. I think just a couple extra days would be nice if that's possible. Just go through my notes here. I guess for me, this is just back to the commission. I do hear your comment, Commissioner Mason, about the rooftop, parks or, barbecues, that sort of thing. We do have that. I'm thinking of one building on the corner of Brown and Mount Diablo in Lafayette. To me, it still looks like a flat, big, heavy building. I personally really do support Mr. Hudson's comment, and I would recommend, if possible, if others agreed, that we consider adding the other definition of height to the objective design standards, because that could kind of go either towards the, in my mind, it's a way of doing a variation of a flat rooftop. It could be a park. It could be a little bit extra, slant to a roof to give maybe more of a semi-rural feel, not just a box.
Let me ask you something about that.
Yeah.
If it's an option to a developer, and I have no problem doing that, channeling what I heard up there, if it's an option, then it may or may not happen. And I'm not advocating that it not be an option. I think they should be options. I like that idea. I thought there was a question in there for me, but it also tied with yours, because I think on both of those, like some kind of slanted roof or a rooftop tends to go with max height. And I think that Brown one, actually, if I remember, it had skylights. And they couldn't do much more because they were coming up against their max height. And it would have been nice if they could have, but they couldn't. So that flexibility, I think, would be good. But I think nowadays, with waivers and concessions, if they're
If they're density bonus.
their density bonus, they can do whatever they want. Then it tends, in my opinion, to be a less expensive development. Whatever they're asking for is either, like the third floor setback. I hate that concession, but it comes up a lot because I think it ruins a beautiful design aspect that is right in these objective standards. So I'm all for it. I just don't know what it's going to do. It's,
Yeah, I don't know if it would do anything. I do like it personally as an option, though. I agree with the public comment. I personally do not care for block design. Like if you are down near the Walnut Creek BART, that works for Walnut Creek. I personally don't care for it. And so in hopes that it would open up a developer to consider a pitched roof, even if it was slight, in order to do a different type of design. I realize it might not pencil out for them and maybe nobody would take advantage of it. I think it was a good suggestion.
I mean, maybe, I mean, ultimately, from my knowledge of development, putting the code in that, just assuming that's all equal, it's going to be what's going to bring the most revenue. There are very few. We've had a couple who come to the city who want to do something for the city, but so maybe people like you and Mr. Hudson will want to pay for that in their apartment or their condo, and so they would like that. So I'm all for giving it. Maybe it's just some additional words. Is that something you guys could give us guidance if we were trying to not let the roof height get impacted by the fact that someone did, you know, a different roof that would measure otherwise would preclude?
Yes, we can help with that. So I think what we've heard and agree with is that often developers will use a flat roof design because it allows the maximum volume beneath that upper height limit. And adding a pitched roof would increase the height of the building, potentially violating the height limit, or just making it taller by definition, by the way the Lafayette measures height. And so if for the purposes of objective design standards, we eliminate that penalty, that measured penalty for a pitched roof, and even require pitched roofs, which they can always waive out of if they're density bonus. But the height would then be measured to the eave line of the roof, and the expectation would be to have a pitched roof. Now, I will say it is absolutely achievable to have both that aesthetic and have the pitched roof at the perimeter of the building that everyone would see from human scale, but also accommodate wells in that for AC condensers, HVAC, or outdoor living up a deck up above to take in the views, et cetera. So I think both are achievable, but it is, I'm sure you're familiar with mansard roofs that have a pitch to them at the perimeter and then interior. But so that can be accommodated.
I know, well, because you can't see because I'm making eye contact with Commissioner Mason. Does that kind of answer, or no? Are you're thinking of something different?
No, I'm laughing because I bring this up every couple of years, so Commissioner DeGiorgio hasn't heard it. We talk about height all the time, but the problem, one of my things that always bugs me is we define height differently than the state codes, the CBC does. And so to me, you just define height the same way the state does, then a lot of these problems go away. I realize I brought up before, it's never gone anywhere, never will go anywhere, but still, when we had that one over on the east end of the town up against the freeway, and they complained that it was too tall. It was a parking garage, and the top of the proposed project was lower than the two-story house that it was replacing. And so you avoid things like that. In the downtown, mostly level, it wouldn't make that much of a difference. In other places, yeah, it would.
What about the idea though? Do you like the idea?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think, but I think you need to clarify it for rooftop penthouses and other things, because you can get so much up there that, it might just waive the, make it redundant. Also, some places though, you have to be far enough away to see it. If I've got something that's 4 stories and a little slope roof or something like that, 2 and 12 to give it some articulation, and it's downtown, you're not gonna be anywhere far enough away to actually see that unless you're up on a roof deck of somebody adjacent property.
But I do like, and I generally agree with that. However, the one, I guess on Oak Hill that we have seen multiple times that is, an approved project. I think of that like the Blockbuster site, like right there where you are coming into town. That one's, I don't even remember, 4 or 6 stories. It's multiple stories. I think that would be a perfect example if there wasn't anything already proposed there, right? Like you would see that coming into town, or you would see the one that's going to be across from the library.
So, yeah.
So I do agree with you though. Sometimes you wouldn't be able to tell, but
Yeah, I'm only thinking, when my comments are, I was only really thinking about just right on Mount Diablo.
yeah, if you're walking along Mount.
If you're walking along there, the interest ones, the far western, far eastern sides of the town, but the core downtown, I don't think, and I'd rather, if it's a trade-off, I'd rather go for higher density, let's just say uglier there, and really nice someplace else in town than stuff which is just that everywhere.
Well, the great thing is this applies everywhere, right?
I'm supportive of it being an option, not the mandate though, just so that's clear, like that could also, and maybe to that, is it possible just to have in one of the visuals, another roof type, but still can do the single attempt that you were demonstrating by the visual, just so that people at least could look at them and maybe think, oh, that's what you want.
Yeah, that's certainly possible.
Okay. I have something else I want to talk about, but before I do,
Sure.
I'm agreeing with you on the idea of flexibility on height, to allow, say differently, allow flexibility in roof design to present what might be construed as semi-rural.
So up on screen, you're seeing my screen, which is Google Earth, and this is the Byron Park project on Tice Valley Road in Walnut Creek, and staff very much supports. We can include an appropriate image of this. It's got pitched roofs. It's certainly a big building. I think it does it very successfully. Breaks down the larger masses into smaller masses, and the pitched roof absolutely helps. And then we also, I'm sure you're familiar with 1000 Dewing. Actually, this is ground level views of Byron Park.
Why don't you pull up the Lafayette Park Hotel? That's another good one.
Yep. So this is 1000 Dewing, or Town Center Phase 3. So also pitch roofs, Mr. Hudson spoke to it, totally support including this in the image boards. And we'll,
Yeah.
as Commissioner Mason requested.
And just one minor comment regarding the 6-3901 purpose section. I didn't see it mention open spaces, and I know that there's substantial amount in the design of the objective designs about open space, and I wonder if that might be included in item D or somewhere else. Yeah, purpose. And maybe it's not necessary. That's something that I had thought about before the discussion on, open spaces.
Is there any specific language that you were thinking of?
No.
Just a mention and nod to.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
and We're good. One question on the non-residential ground floor design. Has I know the development you said by Pleasant Hill, which was built by the BART, they for years had no residential in there. It was not designed for residential. I'm sorry, retail on the ground floor. And so my question, and I'm not, even though I'm in retail, I'm not in ground floor retail, so I don't quite understand. Did you guys talk to like a retail brokers who do ground retail? Because sometimes there's certain things like, you know, you have to have a hood, you know, ventilation so you can put a little coffee shop in there or something like that. And sometimes those get missed and they don't get designed and then they never get used for that. And then they sit vacant and it's just kind of this bad. So was that thought of or incorporated with some of these requirements?
Yeah, we understand absolutely that taller interior ground floor retail spaces are provide flexibility for a range of tenants and food service. So no, we didn't, because we're not getting to the interior spaces, and we're also not. And I understand this may change, but the height is really already in the code, the development the basic development standards, not the design standards. So we're not looking at height,
Okay.
because if we were to require a minimum plate height for ground floor non-residential, that would have implications for the remainder of the space for the upper stories, and we're not.
So you're not changing anything here for that. This is more
No.
transparency and blank walls.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And then I had a question about vacancies, but that wouldn't matter here either because that's more operational. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Another one was, so if someone didn't want to do the objective standards, they could do a discretionary request. So, and then it would be like it's always been. Is there anything that happens if somebody has a density bonus project and they have access to concessions and waivers that changes it from ODS to discretionary, and then I guess that discretionary would go under the density bonus discretionary, or is it's a little unclear what happens when they start. Let's start this question. If you have a ODS project, but you're asking for a concession because you have density bonus, does it stay in that category or can it? Maybe that's an overlapping question. I'm not sure.
The only thing that would put a project into discretionary review would be the developer's choice to do that, to get some. So if a project is doing density bonus, they by law are entitled to request concessions and waivers, and state law says that cities can only apply objective standards.
Okay, then let me ask another question. Is there any, well, a pre-question is, has anyone, including you guys, ever seen a city challenge a concession or waiver? I've asked before and the answer's been no, basically. I'm just wondering if that's changed yet.
Not recently, but I know there is case law on it.
Okay. How about you guys? Have you seen that at all?
No, I can't think of an example. But I do know that the concessions, the waivers that are requested can't really just be anything that the applicant doesn't want to comply with, right? It's got to be demonstrated that that is what is prohibiting achieving the density that the applicant otherwise would achieve, right? That it's a limiting factor, it's a constraint, that's what's keeping them from the capacity that they want. But I know this is changing, right? So it might be a good question for the city attorney, but as far as who's required to demonstrate that connection, that may actually be the city.
Right. And where this question is going is, would there be an appropriate ODS standard that kicks in if there's a concession and waiver. For instance, if the third floor setback was requested as a, and I'm not sure if that's a concession or a waiver, to not set it back. That's a waiver, concession? I don't.
The step back.
No, but if they asked to not have the step back, whatever that is, a concession or a waiver,
Yeah.
that we would say, okay, well, in that case, by our standards that we've already put in place, you would have to, your ODS standards would require something else, you know, so.
I don't think
Hmm.
state law would allow us to put contingencies on density bonus behaviors. Like if they,
We gotta,
by state law, get the concession or the waiver, I don't think we could put an additional requirement based on them getting that.
okay, I'm just trying, because I think the setback is a good example of one that gets blown up a
Mhm.
lot. And it's a good design and it gets, and we can't really challenge it because we would have to prove the affirmative that they can't do it, which we can't do.
What I was thinking, what project at least three of us know, is what about the project right across the street? Could they got they eliminated the setbacks and got the extra story. Could they still go in on ODS?
You mean the one,
The one up against the creek?
yeah, that way.
No,
Sorry.
Yes, that way. Okay, you're right.
Sorry,
I'm
you're messing me up.
Yes. I
Right,
do that a lot. Could
Right.
could that one go in, still go in under ODS? If it was coming before us?
So every project that's proposing multifamily is required to comply with the objective design standards.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't, then they have to go through a discretionary review, which could potentially allow the reviewing body to ask for additional design requirements. So from a developer's point of view, the objective design standards is the best path forward because it's a known quantity. They know exactly what's required of them. It's a ministerial process. So even if there were a public hearing, there's a very limited scope of what can be changed to the project because it just has to meet the requirements listed. And if it does, it must be approved. It's that straightforward.
Okay.
So they can choose to take a discretionary path, but I don't know why they would.
well, they've already gone through the density bonus path,
Yeah, that's what I was trying to ask.
Yeah.
Can you do?
You just think if it
density
came
bo-
today.
yeah.
Can you do
Or-
density bonus
Okay.
and ODS? If the only change is adding a story to get
If they're proposing a project that requires ODS, that would still apply. If their project also is density bonus, they have concessions and waivers that they can use to excuse certain specific development standards. And if for some reason those concessions and waivers didn't cover all the things in ODS that they didn't comply with, then they would be kicked out of ODS and go through a discretionary review process.
okay,
But it's highly unlikely that that would happen.
thank you.
So, Chair, to your question of conditional standards, I agree that we would not want to, nor do I think it would be permitted to treat density bonus projects differently than any other project. I do think, just like in Excel, you can do conditional formatting on a cell that if it is a positive number, the text is black, and if it is a negative number, the text is red. I think that if a certain condition is proposed, then the following shall apply. I think that is perfectly legal
Yeah.
because it is applicable to any and all projects, irrespective of their invocation of density bonus.
Okay.
But the secondary condition would also need to be objective, right? Like if there's no third story setback, then the building has to be blue. That would be, or a specific shade of blue. Perhaps color's not the best, but
Then they could do a waiver on that. All right, anything else, you guys? I'm getting
Just
good.
a very, very quick on the ODS forms that you're removing the point system on. so then it'll be a yes, no, right, for all the items. And if one of the items is no, then it has to go, it won't be ministerially approved. It has to then go over. And will the city council approve that form, or is that just something that you modify as needed?
Typically, the form would not need city council approval. It would implement the code that is approved and adopted by the city council. So typical of our application forms online, there's things that staff have created based on what was approved in the code.
Thank you.
That just reminded me of one question. Do you think the natural revision of the ODS code would follow the housing element cycle? Or would it be on its own? You know, every year it could be updated because, oh, we realized there was a mistake. We should have done it this way.
It would not need to follow the housing element cycle.
So it could just be at will, basically?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. If there is a epiphany or a desire, even a few months after it is in effect, we can process that.
And that doesn't require any additional SQL work because it's all been already covered. And as long as someone hasn't submitted, as soon as, you know, it's just like any other code change, once it comes in, then whoever applies after that would be their process.
I would say it is just like any other municipal code change.
Okay.
Yes.
Just asking mainly if, you know, we have an aha moment in a few years, you know, how would we deal with it? So, okay.
Yeah, and I would imagine that aha moment would come from additional state law that's trickling
That
through.
moment. Yeah. All right. Well, it sounds like we've talked about maybe changing some of the graphics to be more semi-rural looking. And then we've also talked about this pitch roof idea. Unless you guys want to keep talking, I'm okay with hearing a motion to modify or whatever anyone wants to motion.
So Chair, my notes are that we will add the images, photographs of Byron Park and Town Center 3 into the boards that are part of the annex or the appendix to the ODS. And eliminate the height penalty for pitched roof on ODS buildings. And then the third question was whether or not the commission wanted to require pitched roofs, disallowing just flat roofs. And so I think that's still an open question.
I don't particularly want to require it, does it? Where are you guys? Is just straw poll?
I don't want to require it.
And then just one question on the eliminating the height that to allow them to do the pitched roof, but it doesn't just blow the height to anything now, right? There's still a limiting factor.
Correct.
Yeah.
So the square or rectangular part of the building would still be the same,
And then the
subject to
roof
the
as
same
well.
height limit. You would just not, if you put a triangle on top for a pitched roof form, that would not count against your height.
Okay.
And I suppose we should incorporate that would not be living space.
Right.
Yeah,
And then I
that's
think we would also add the outdoor deck to that. I personally would like to do that too, because I think that livens buildings up but sometimes that's what we had on the Brown Street one, right? Where they had to,
Mhm.
all they could do is just like articulating door and the stairs came out because anything above that meant they had to lower the building. So I think that would be a good one. I don't know if you guys are on board with that, to allow flexibility there if it's just used to make outdoor deck space more habitable, but not livable.
I think maybe what you do there is you have minimum square footage for outdoor decks. If the intent is to get people outside, 60 square foot roof deck is going to do it. But on the two kitty corner from across the street from Target, they're both 1,200, 1,500 square foot decks with an outdoor barbecue and sitting places so people can congregate there.
That's interesting. I don't really like to tell people they have to do something, but what were you asking earlier about open space? Yeah, because that sounds like that's being taken care of
Yeah.
open space requirements.
Yeah, that's how I always looked at it.
I don't know. I don't really like to tell people
I
what.
don't like to tell people, but could be an alternate to a pitched roof.
Yeah. I mean, I think it could, and we can allow it without telling them to do it though.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to tell.
Okay, okay. So we're back to just pitched roof with the square and then the ability to do outdoor space with the same aspect of not having to lose height to do that. Are you guys, does that sound reasonable?
Well, that implies that you have to build walls and you
I
know,
mean, you don't have
safety
to-
structures.
You don't have to do it.
No, wouldn't that increase the height also?
Not
Yeah,
if,
but so would the pitch roof.
Right.
Yeah.
well, I think we would craft it so that the
Where,
deck would be within, it'd be functionally the same as a
The roof.
well for HVAC equipment, et cetera. So at the
parapet.
perimeter, you would see a pitched roof, and then within the volume of the building, the footprint of the building would be occupiable outdoor space, so not conditioned living space. And you could do that in a pitched roof condition, or in a flat roof condition.
If I could just comment, just to be 100% clear, the way that the standards are written right now, nothing is preventing any sort of rooftop open space. And as far as a parapet, just from a building code perspective, you wouldn't be able to have any rooftop open space without a parapet. So as the standards are written, if you just want to allow the option, that option is there. If there is something additional that you would like to see, that would be helpful.
Because none of these have a height limit as a condition, ODS standard, right? Is that right? I don't think
Correct. It is silent on height.
okay. So is that coming under something else then if we do that, or?
Isn't it just it's just defining what height is for the ODS, right?
Correct. We would add a definition of height specific to ODS and ODS projects that would change such that height is measured basically to the top of the building wall or the bottom of the eave. We can decide exactly what wording, such that anything above the top plate height of the top floor would be not counted towards height. Whether it's a
Is-
pitched roof or a roof deck or
Okay.
parapet.
Without that, then they would be limited by that in our code, not in the ODS. Even if they used an ODS, okay. So this will allow, this is a conditional statement. Quite frankly, yeah.
What do you mean?
It's saying if you want to do because we're putting this in the ODS, right?
Mhm.
Say, if you want to do a pitched roof, here's how you measure the height of your property. Here's how the development. But if you're not doing an ODS, your roof height will be dictated by the discretionary code that you go under, which might not measure it the same way, I think.
We have a number of code sections that have definitions specific to that code section. The ADU ordinance has a number of definitions that apply only there. So anytime a definition is listed within a code section versus in our general definitions, that means it only applies within the scope of that ordinance, that specific code section.
Okay. I think I understand.
Good, because you just got me more. Well, this natural question, since we're talking about Gateway One, what about, little vertical pop-ups to get a small vaulted area? You see them typically in the corners of buildings that are, public facing to give it an architectural element.
It's all part of it, right? It's all the same.
What if but we're saying if we're talking pitched, we're immediately talking like this. I'm talking about the project over the old video place that we're just talking about. Probably want a marquee element there because it's visible as you're entering the town. Or the tower over by behind Pizza Antica, which looks nice. That's the element there, but how would that, or are we just saying, hey, if you want to put that there, you can't go through ODS? but we can allow a slope there.
I don't think we're addressing that, and I don't think we should, because that's a different element. I mean, what we're trying to do is address the fact that you won't get penalized for doing a sloped roof. And that was kind of going back to the semi-rural nature. So that was the point of that. And then it evolved a little into the rooftop deck, kind of some of your comments.
Yeah, but if you looked like those pictures of the project in Walnut Creek, you know, they had pitched roofs, but they also had
Right.
vertical elements. You know, are we treating them the same? Is the vertical element the same? Okay, as long as it's below the pitch.
We're not, we haven't directed anyone to do that yet. I mean, you're bringing it up, but we haven't said, yes, we're doing that.
Oh, no, I know that. I'm just trying to say what your definition of pitch entails. Is it everything below the maximum roof height is acceptable? Is it only the pitch, but not anything else? It is not little dormers sticking out or whatever.
I guess I was hoping staff would take our intent and make it something that seemed reasonable from there. So I don't know the exact answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we can provide language that would clarify that what we're allowing are roofs and outdoor use of the roof.
That's not, thank you. That's all
Not
I
habitable
asked.
space, not additional architectural elements, things like so, just to capture, you're talking about, I think maybe a faux bell tower or something like that would not be something that's permitted.
But would, like, for example, dormers be included?
Sorry?
Would a dormer be acceptable on a pitched roof?
I think that would be considered part of the roof form, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
And will this need to come back, or can we do this with the understand? It's up to us. Okay, so what do you guys want? I don't need it to come back.
I don't need it to come back either.
No.
I
Okay.
agree with that.
So we're mind melding, so we're on the same page. Okay, good. All right, anything else? Otherwise, let's get a amendment going to let everyone go home. Everyone's looking at Carl.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm gonna need to practice in a couple weeks, but not tonight.
then you want me to make a
Yes, please.
recommendation?
Yes, please.
All right, I move that we ask staff to update the ODS as discussed tonight, including graphics and other items discussed, and forward it to the city council with a recommendation of approval.
Is that enough direction? Okay.
Second,
We'll do roll call. Commissioner Mason,
aye.
Commissioner DeGiorgio,
Aye.
Commissioner Radnich,
I
Chair Labange. Aye. Okay, that motion passes 4-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you also, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Everyone in the room, thank you.
And if I can just quickly, for the record, say thank you to the DRC
Yeah.
the subcommittee for all their hard work, along with staff and the Lisa Wise consultants. Thank you.
And their expertise
Yes.
that we clearly
Yes,
don't
but
have.
thank you for all your hard work on this.
Yes, thank you. All right. All right. That is it on new. Let me get to the agenda. I think we're done. Okay. Other business? Anyone? No? All right. Commissioners reports? I don't think we have any. No? Planning directors report?
A friendly reminder to reach out to your networks to see if anyone in your network would be interested in serving on the Planning Commission. We currently have 2 vacancies. Staff has internally discussed with the city manager and council liaison. So we're going out and reaching out to members of the community as well. So asking you if you can. And just wanted to say thank you for a good, productive year on the Planning Commission and wish you happy holidays.
Thank you. All right. Oh, gosh.
And this is for staff. That's why I didn't say anything. I was reading about next year being new California building standards being released, and I assume that you're gonna brief. I didn't see anything that's going to affect what we're doing, but if I assume you'll just bring it, you'll highlight changes if necessary.
Correct. We don't anticipate any significant effect. We have, this is a known update. The state does it every 3 years, notwithstanding recent legislation which paused updates until 2031, but not for the building code, just for local amendments. So the incremental or periodic creep and expansion of requirements to build continue. And so effective January 1, the new code will go into effect. Contemporaneously, the fire code will be updated and go into effect. And so early next year, we'll bring to you for adoption, for formal adoption, the both of those, I believe.
All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.